Welcome to Rolling Hills United Methodist Church and this conversation about the book Team Vince by Tony Moretti. I want to say right off the bat that we are recording the presentation so that others who were unable to be here tonight will have the opportunity to enjoy it later. It will be posted on the church's YouTube page with a link to our website. And maybe you'll hear something that you want to go back and listen to again later, so it will be available to you as well. I think many of you know a lot about Tony, know Tony and Margaret well, know the family, but just to reiterate, or because we always learn new things about one another, Tony is a longtime resident of Lomita, and he and his wife Margaret, well, Tony not only grew up there, and they both went to high school there in Torrance, living in Lomita, and then they raised their kids, Janina, Michael, Philip, and Mary, and now are next door neighbors with their grandkids, which is a fabulous life. Tony's career was in architecture, and sort of the pinnacle moment for him was becoming a fellow in the American Institute of Architects. He retired from his firm in Los Angeles after 3 decades there, and a lot of recognition for the good work they did in buildings around the city. Nowadays he enjoys painting and finding beauty in the ordinary. And some of you know him from the art studio, or you've been to his art shows, the places where he's been able to invite a public audience. And his favorite topics are scenes from Lomita and people who are important to him. Other interests include golfing, volunteering here at church, walking around the neighborhood with his grandsons, rooting for the Dodgers, which of course this is the right year to be rooting for the Dodgers, and like his father before him, listening to jazz on the radio. So Tony, here we're all trooping around with this 400-page book. What motivated you to begin work on what has become Team Vince, a son's care memoir?
Okay. First of all, thank you all for coming. It feels weird to be talking to you through this microphone. Hopefully I'll get used to it. But I do really appreciate seeing you all here. You guys are our community mostly. You're our friends, the people that we knew we could count on to have a look at this project that we've been working on. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you to you for suggesting that we do this and for the work that you put into it.
Well, we were here in the sanctuary when the moment came, and spontaneously, I'm April Heron, one of the pastors here at Rolling Hills United Methodist Church, and we were gathered here for a concert. One of our worship musicians has an independent music career, and at the intermission of the concert, Tony was poking his phone and said, "I think my book is posted up on Amazon." And I whipped out my phone. I said, "Okay, then I'm buying it." And I learned later I have the defective copy where there was proofreading corrections made later, but it read beautifully and smoothly to me. So yes, that was the moment when we said, "Oh, hey, we've got to do this."
Okay, so what motivated the book was Margaret and I went through a long ordeal with my dad, and we just felt like it was probably something that other people might find relatable. At a much earlier time in our lives, long before Dad ever got sick, we had a dark experience where a friend of ours died unexpectedly, and it was a time when we were sort of reeling, and a stranger suggested a book to us, a memoir written by a guy, William Styron, Darkness Visible. And we read that book, and it's when we began to understand that reading something by someone else can be a step toward healing. So we understood that maybe this was a project worth doing. And then this week, we received a text message from a friend of ours and I'm going to read it to you because I feel like it completely validates what we were going for. This was to Margaret, and it said, "It's been very cathartic reading Tony's book. It's making me revisit and heal a lot of trauma of my family's past 5 years. It's great to read stories like this because in the hardest times of your life, even though you may feel alone, this journey is one almost everyone must go through. It's all very relatable."
I couldn't agree more. I was just sharing with one of the guests here that as I read the book, I had to take pauses from time to time to journal and reflect on my own experience with my dad, and we've compared notes, so you know that he also had Lewy body dementia, and the commonalities were very striking, and it was a chance for me to revisit in your company, in a way, through the book, what my journey was like. So thank you for that. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? Like, when did you know that you wanted to do this? When did you start? How long did it take? How'd you go about it?
My first step was, well, we had like 6 years of emails, so we knew that we would be able to reconstruct the history. My 3 siblings live out of town, and all during that whole time, I kept them in touch via email, so I had that record. I reached out to an author friend of mine who lived in Austin, Texas, asking her if she might be interested in writing a book about this. And she was busy doing her own novel, but she referred me to her copy editor, Ilana Jackson. That's someone I had never met. And this Ilana Jackson in Austin, Texas, looked at some of the emails and my synopsis of the story, and she had experience editing caregiving articles for magazines, and she was immediately enthusiastic. She saw a tone, the way my siblings and I talked to each other. She understood that Margaret was integral, and she used words like integration and honesty. And she told me that it was a project worth doing, but she wasn't going to write it. She said I should write it. And so we launched that way, and she has been part of the project from the beginning. Really deserves as much credit for the book as I do. I wrote everything, and she checked and smoothed out everything I wrote. But what she really did that I never could have done is that she envisioned the whole thing. And she's the one that kept telling me to add more depth, write more stories, flashbacks, tell her more about my relationship with my dad, Earl and Helen. It's all a bunch of stuff that I never would have presumed coming from me it would be interesting enough. But when an outsider tells you to go ahead and write that, and she starts weaving it all together, it becomes quite fun. And that's how we did it. I called her my architect.
And using a metaphor from your own life.
Yeah. I was picturing, a nice, tight, concise little memoir like the one Margaret and I had read by William Stryon, and it ballooned into this 444-page thing, which gave me a lot of anxiety. But there it is.
Well, I've talked to many people who have said, yeah, it's 400 pages, but it can read quickly. Your design abilities, giving margins and spaces and large enough print and putting in pictures, and the compelling nature of it, we speed right along as we read. And so it sounds like another metaphor for the way she worked with you was like as a coach, saying, here's where I want even more, and here's how we might structure things. And
she interviewed my family members early on. She took the initiative to do that. I don't think I could have done that. We don't do that among ourselves, interviewing my kids, interviewing Margaret, but she did it.
Yeah,
so that allowed
she came here from Austin. I got to meet her too.
She came and visited Lomita all the way from Austin.
Great. Okay, well, I think people are going to enjoy hearing you read a little bit from the book this evening. I want to say that one of the things I appreciated most about the book was the way you gave yourself permission to use whatever strategy was going to get you through a particular experience, no matter how unconventional or unique your strategy was. Like you're trying to cope with a lot of unfamiliar territory and experiences you had no past experience with, and so then things would bubble up in the way you reacted that I just got such a kick out of. So I'm really glad that your first reading is going to give us a sense of that kind of spontaneous, spur-of-the-moment instinct that had the power to redeem really tough situations sometimes. So this first reading, it had been about a year since the Parkinson's diagnosis, and your dad was suddenly starting to lose weight. And so that needed to be investigated. And here we go.
Here we go. Email, August 23rd, 2013, from me to my siblings. Subject, eat. Newest issue is his weight. He's on a steady decline. He has good food and enjoys eating, but we suspect he eats only when people are there to put food in front of him, or better yet, to eat with him. We told him he needs to improve. Margaret brings him a dinner plate every night and stocks his freezer with homemade meals. He just needs to be more diligent about eating them. For starters, he needs to make eating part of his morning routine, same as the stretching exercises he learned in physical therapy. It was wishful thinking that Dad would, on his own volition, eat, or even try to make eating part of his morning routine, as I said in this email to my siblings. But now we were sure he was no longer making his famous flaxseed oatmeal, though the ingredients were right there in his cupboard. We also suspected he wasn't doing the stretching exercises he'd learned in physical therapy. We just never saw evidence to suggest that he was. As we mulled over ways to bolster Dad's diet, we realized that we also needed to take more initiative with the healthcare professionals in Dad's large HMO. That they would always lead us in the right direction had been another of our wishful assumptions. By now, it was clear that they weren't always looking at the big picture. With good intentions, they'd generate a chain of information that would take on a life of its own. It reminded me of the game of telephone that kids play while sitting around a campfire. A message gets whispered from one person to the next, around the circle, until it comes out at the end, completely jumbled. Things turned into a game of telephone when we mentioned Dad's declining weight to the Parkinson's doctor. With concern, he explained that weight loss is bad for Parkinson's patients because it can weaken their immune system and make them more susceptible to catching illnesses. So this appointment led to a referral for a swallowing study. Best I can figure, the doctor must have seen the previous choking incident noted on Dad's chart, put that together with the weight loss, and assumed the two were related. In any case, we had our marching orders. I took Dad to the swallowing study and stood off to the side as Dad was placed against a wall in front of a large imaging machine and told to drink an X-rayable fluid. No sooner had the study begun than one of the technicians stepped in and aborted the procedure. They apparently saw too much liquid going sideways down the wrong pipe and into Dad's lungs. Since there was nothing more the technicians could do, they sent us on our way. The next referral was to a nutritionist. A week or two would have passed by the time Dad and I walked into the nutritionist's office. By now, I wasn't exactly sure what the problem was we were trying to solve, and I was beginning to suspect we were on a wild goose chase. The nutritionist was upbeat and friendly, and sitting behind her desk, working off the chart, she became alarmed. She spoke as if Dad was in crisis, like he was starving to death. I guess I can imagine how someone focused on nutrition would piece together the notes on a chart, weight loss, and an aborted swallowing study, and reach a dire conclusion. But when she started talking about, of all things, feeding tubes, I'd heard enough. Impulsively, I cut her off with a timeout signal, My hands were literally in the air, making a T. I launched into a respectful rant, explaining the situation from my point of view, not the charts. I said, Dad eats. He eats heartily. He loves to eat. He enjoys his food. If you put a lasagna in front of him, watch it disappear. Does he eat frequently enough? We're not sure. We're working on that. He's lazy about feeding himself. Margaret and I do the best we can to keep food in front of him. The neurology doctor suggested we stock his cabinet with Ensure. A few a day to add calories. We started doing that. If you have other ideas, we're open to hearing them. In all our appointments, this was the first time I asserted myself enough to change the course of things. The nutritionist understood and accepted what I told her, and then the meeting ended. No follow-up appointments were scheduled. For that, Margaret would praise my efforts. I walked out of there not knowing whether I'd done the right thing. Second-guessing a healthcare professional always feels dicey, but I was confident that I knew Dad best, and my best judgment was telling me that this issue had been blown out of proportion. The elevator doors delivered Dad and me down to the main lobby, and passing the gift shop, I realized they might have something I needed. Wait here a second, I said, and I went inside. When I came out with a couple of payday candy bars in my hand, Dad lit up. Paydays are our all-time favorite candy bars, and this wouldn't be the first time we enjoyed them together. We made our way out to the car and munched them while driving home. Watching Dad go to town on his payday put me at ease. Who cares which pipe it goes down, I thought. Dad was happy, and that was good enough for me. Feeding tube my ass.
All right. So trusting your own judgment is hard in a situation that you'd never been in before, but in this case, it steered you, and many other cases steered you well. And then that, I don't know how, I mean, I think we all do it, but it's always a wonder to me how our brains can come up with such a response as, oh yeah, if we just had the payday candy bars, this outing will have all been worth it. Way to go. Another strategy that related to eating, I recall from the book, is that when it was clear that he wouldn't eat unless somebody was sitting there with him, you and or Margaret would go over in the evening, and in order to remain tranquil while you sat there waiting for him to eat, Margaret had the card deck and played solitaire, or you would put on one of your favorite shows. Like, it didn't have to be an intense, big, significant thing. You were just hanging out and doing what it took for you to be relaxed to pass the time together.
We couldn't bear the idea of delivering the food and then just leaving him.
Yeah. All right. Well, so another standout feature for me was the honesty with which you admitted your fatigue, your feelings of resentment or frustration from time to time. The fact that you were willing to be so honest about your feelings made it much more relatable and real than if you had only put in the highlight happy moments. That, you really helped explain how the journey was full of highs and lows. And so perhaps you'd be willing to share a piece. I think you are ready because we talked about this, but when it came to the time when your dad started really suffering from confusion and maybe even having some hallucinations, and you're trying to get him to go to bed and he's confused about what is a blanket and how does it work. So
yeah, this is when the hallucinating began, and we were completely not prepared for it or expecting it. Then one evening, when Margaret was about to leave after a standard visit with Dad, he asked her to stay for another minute. He walked her upstairs to the foot of his bed for a meeting. "How's this work?" he asked. You mean the bed? Yeah. And so it began. But Margaret had absolutely no idea how to engage in a conversation about bedding. She remembers wondering what the problem could have been. It was the same old bed with the same old blankets. What was there that needed figuring out? We can't recall how things ended that night, but the problem didn't go away. The next time Dad needed to discuss this issue, he brought it up with me at the end of a long, hard day. It's worth noting here that my work days absolutely wore me out. The routine would begin at an uncomfortable rise time of 5:30 a.m. to beat some LA traffic, but the commute still lasted an hour. At work, my days were intense and spanned 8 hours minimum. Now into my late 50s, my stamina was waning. My mood arriving home was almost always sour, not so much from the events of the day, but rather from sheer exhaustion. The tough drive home always delivered the final knockout punch to whatever happy mojo I managed to carry out of the office. Back home, I usually forced myself to get a little exercise, then focused the rest of my energy toward being not unpleasant with Margaret over dinner. After that, I used whatever time was left to bathe, watch a little TV, and try to relax and pamper myself before going to bed early to do it all again the next day. Now, of course, Dad had to be wedged into that routine. So there I stood at Dad's back door, saying goodnight with one hand on the knob. My work with him was almost finished, the friendly visit paid, and I ached to sneak back through the gate to the normality of my own home. But then Dad says, "Hey, Tony, can I ask you one more thing?" Please, God, let this be simple. But when he turned to lead me upstairs, I feared what was coming. To the foot of his bed we went, and the meeting was in session. What should I do about this? Your blankets? Yeah. I so wanted to go home. I racked my tired brain to come up with a response to satisfy him and get myself out of there. I walked the twisted back corridors of his mind, trying to find the place where this weird obsession lived so I could ask it what it wanted. But what I conjured up was cheery and lame. Oh, they're in good shape. They look all ready to go. That didn't do it. He stood there frozen, perplexed, studying the bedding. For all I knew, he was looking at a giant octopus with flailing tentacles. My blood began to boil. I'd done my work. I'd paid the visit. I made the small talk with the same forced, cheerful reassurance as always. It was well past the amount of time I wanted to spend with him, which on any given weeknight averaged somewhere around 0. I tried again, but now I could hear my calmness slipping. The blankets look fine, Dad. Just lie down. Put them on top of you. You'll be asleep in no time. When he lifted his hand to ask the next question, I snapped, Dad, just go to bed. They're just blankets. It's okay. Your mind is creating this. Then he fired back, I'm doing the best I can, Tony. Whoa, that stopped me in my tracks. He too felt frustrated and trapped. There we stood with our hands at our sides, two exasperated guys, like beat-up prize fighters facing each other in this dark bedroom, looking at this bed with no ideas about what to do next. Oh, how I longed to be home, relaxing in front of my TV, maybe watching Lakers basketball, maybe with a cup of ice cream. But abandoning Dad in such a confused state was not an option. I had to think harder, to find an answer. What does Dad want? What does he want? What does he want? Ah, yes, a mommy. Dad's always looking for mommy. I thought about the girlfriends, how he always tried to get them to baby him, to be his mommy. Taking a breath, I shoved my anger down a notch deeper. Then I shifted into mommy mode and basically babied him to bed. There. Hush, little boy. I gently sat him down, stroked his back, and pulled off his slippers. Gag, those ugly feet. all while staying in character. Removing his glasses, I eased him down sideways and covered him up. Then, with a kiss on the forehead, I said, "Sweet dreams, Daddy." He went for it. As I tucked him in for the night, ever so gently, I imagined how perfect this tender scene would be for a children's book. I'll love you forever. I'll love you for always. Or better, it could be written up in a cheesy care magazine. How tenderness conquers all. But man, I wanted to throw the bastard through the wall. I had not yet put my finger on it, but this babying charade went to a dark place in my soul, to memories of my teenage years when this poor, sad, divorced guy had jerked me all over the place. It was happening again, and with his Parkinson's, the effer had me pinned under his afflicted thumb. Well played, Dad. Leaving his room, I felt like I'd spent everything, and my emotions were grinding bone on bone. That was a hard night. The performance it took to get myself out of there felt epic. I didn't know I had it in me. Tony Moretti, actor, psychoanalyst. The Academy Award for the best performance solving a non-existent problem goes to... It felt significant, yet at the same time, I knew trying to explain this to anyone other than Margaret would be impossible. There would be no accolades.
So, in fact, you have given us a window in an attempt to explain this, and I would be surprised if people here could not relate to that sense of what it's like when the son or daughter has a role reversal with a parent who's got dementia or some other really catastrophic disease that is making them the frail one needing the care. And none of us are really comfortable getting into that parental role with our own parents. So thank you for bringing that forward.
I want to make sure, too, that it's clear. Dad lived next door to us.
Yeah.
Probably knew that or figured it out by now, but that
Right.
just was another layer added on to the whole thing.
Yeah, so a little bit of the history there is the property had been in family hands for quite a long time and went through various incarnations of what the homes were used for. And so you did have the gate and the fence that allowed you to pass back and forth easily. And to get him there, you had moved him back from a home in LA proper that he was living in. Yeah. Yeah. So many people move in with an elderly parent. Others are visiting regularly in a home or care facility. And we all are having to navigate our way through these unwanted, unlooked for, unexpected experiences that really ask more of us than we thought we had to give. And yet, as you said, what's the choice? You share a number of stories in the book about connecting with people, whether it's family members, old friends, students, colleagues, doctors, other medical professionals. And it's almost like as you experience the array of people that you might come into contact with, anybody is a candidate for somebody who might be able to offer some sort of encouragement or support. Your next reading is going to help us understand the title of the book and reflect on the overarching metaphor of Team Vince. And so this reading comes from the consequence of your dad being diagnosed with a melanoma on his ear, and he was about now to have surgery to remove the melanoma and biopsy to make sure the margins are all clear and it's been handled.
Margaret and I both took the day off to get Dad to surgery. It wasn't necessarily a two-person job, but we wanted to be together in case something happened that required on-the-spot decision-making. We'd been together when he got the Parkinson's diagnosis back in 2011, and we wanted to be together now. Having the mole removed and the lymph node collected all at once seemed like quite an ado, especially for someone who already had so many health issues, but none of this was optional. First thing, we were led into a small consult room to meet with the surgeon, and again, we were surprised by how young and unassuming he was, just a nice person. He introduced himself as Dr. Lee and looked to be in his 30s. As he explained what was going to happen, he glanced back and forth, maintaining eye contact with all three of us. He understood we were in it together. Wishing us well, he got up to leave. Because I liked him, I blurted, "Welcome to Team Vince." He grinned and flashed us a clenched fist of solidarity, shouting back, "Team Vince." As soon as I heard myself call out that phrase, something clicked, and I liked it. Welcome to Team Vince captured and coalesced my feelings about this whole journey, both positive and negative. It trumpeted solidarity, as in, hooray for our awesome team. But it also spoke to the aloneness that Margaret and I often felt, as in, welcome to my world. With all its layers and complexities, welcome to Team Vince became my standard greeting for Dad's doctors and care professionals from that day forward. Welcome to Team Vince was me telling the HMO that Margaret and I were the captains of this team. Put a C on their chest, my brother Vince once said. We'd been there from the beginning, with freeway drives to medical appointments, a shaky left leg, the Parkinson's diagnosis, a move back to Lomita, scary blankets, a feeding tube folly, the people. Nobody knew the big picture like we did. We had done the work, made the decisions, and were living with our decisions. Dad was our project, our patient, not the HMOs. The physicians, though vital, were support players in this drama. Many were here today, gone tomorrow participants. Their charts couldn't begin to tell the story, the context, the history, the emotion. That's obvious now, but back then, I was just figuring it out. Welcome to Team Vince was me saying to the professionals, you're part of something larger. Some doctors already understood this. Dr. Lee latched on to Team Vince immediately, and he greeted us with it, but others, not so much. Meanwhile, the sheer number of doctors involved in Dad's care was getting ridiculous. As Dad's world shrank, and with it his joy of living, the team just kept getting bigger. More and more resources were being tapped to support less and less living. I found this troubling, and when I said, welcome to Team Vince, it was also my underhanded commentary on the swelling team and what struck me as a misappropriation of medical attention. Margaret and I viewed healthcare as a vital resource that was, for many, hard to come by. Our kids, now in their 20s, were uncertain about where their coverage would come from. On the other end, we had Dad, old and withering as he was, and more, now being kept alive by dialysis treatments 3 days per week. We asked ourselves repeatedly, why is all this healthcare muscle being directed toward people with so little life left? I mean, just what are we saving here? Aren't there people out there who could benefit more? People with a future who maybe lacked coverage? A pregnant mom? Or the self-employed attorney we knew whose young family avoided the dentist because it was too expensive? The doling system seemed wrong and made me wonder what I would do when my time came. Would Team Tony be as onerous as Team Vince? Would I someday put my kids through this? The thought of it disturbed me. If I had the same disease, I'd want a dignified way to turn out the lights and say, goodbye, everybody. Thanks for a great run. I'd want to bow out early on my own terms. Unfortunately, our society provides few paths for that. I knew no one would ever think of euthanasia when I said, "Welcome to Team Vince," or I wouldn't have said it. What I did want them to pick up on was the sunny meaning, which is simply that we were all in this together. Welcome to Team Vince. Let's make the best of this. Let's try to have some fun.
In that reading, you see yourself rightly as a captain of a big team. And I was struck by your willingness to do the coaching. So you had this email connection with your siblings, none of whom lived close enough to do the work that you and Margaret were doing. But there were times when you were very direct about saying, okay, there's a thing coming up and here's your assignment, and I need you to show up, or we've got to have a break. Somebody else needs to come and do this for a few hours. Like you, I thought, had a remarkable degree of putting it out there, because maybe from that coaching metaphor, and it's good because people can't always recognize how they might be more helpful. Sometimes we ask and the help isn't forthcoming, but if you don't offer the coaching or the invitation or the suggestion, people don't necessarily know.
Mm-hmm.
And you recognize that what it meant for each person was different. Like you expected your siblings to pitch in because they're the kids of Vince. Your young adult children who were recruited to help, it was recognized they're young adults with a need to begin to generate income in their lives. So the estate compensated them for their work, which they were thrilled to do, but also recognized that the giving could go both ways by your dad providing some resources to them. So, and then teammates turned out to be a colleague, friend, long forgotten, who was sort of rediscovered in a similar circumstance a little bit ahead of your dad. And when he died, that team member donated the recliner chair or something.
Yeah.
So it was a very multifaceted team, as you know, if you're reading some good ideas in it. I also was impressed, having a team isn't the only possible metaphor one can use when thinking about illness. And you had the wisdom to reject the images or the strategies that were not going to be a good fit for you. Not that they're wrong for anybody else, but you encountered someone who described caregiving as such a meaningful, transcendent experience that you began to refer to that person as the Mother Teresa example. But you did not perceive yourself as saintly. And so that was another example to me as how you were facing the truth of, and not trying to hold yourself to expectations that weren't going to be a fit for you. I got to be me and do it my way. So as you share this last reading, I want to thank you in advance for reflecting on what does care actually mean and how am I experiencing myself as a caregiver.
It was not lost on Margaret and me that for all the effort we spent taking care of Dad, we never felt much sympathy for him. We talked about that, comparing notes as we liked to do. We both felt the same. We were compelled to do everything in our power to keep Dad comfortable and happy for as long as he could last, but we worried little about the final outcome. We were fine with whatever fate had in store, although I did pray that fate wouldn't drag its feet too long. Our matter-of-factness made us question ourselves. Were we callous individuals, or were we just too busy taking care of him to feel compassion? I got to thinking about the word care and found it has two definitions. Number one, look after, provide for the needs of. Number two, feel concern or interest, attach importance to something. For meaning number one, look after, we were all in 100%. For meaning number two, be concerned, we were near zero. In other words, We cared entirely for Dad and little about him. Mother Teresa. One day, while on an errand, Margaret bumped into an old work acquaintance. In casual conversation, they landed on the topic of our situation with Dad. Before Margaret could share any details, the woman gushed, "Oh, God bless you. I had to care for my mother at the end of her life, and I felt so blessed to have that opportunity. I cherish the memories of her living with me. I miss the tender moments we shared, like when I washed her back." The woman's effusiveness threw Margaret for a loop, and she didn't know how to respond. Repulsed by the thought of Dad living in our home, she later said to me, "Wash him? Are you kidding me? I can barely stand the sight of his gnarly toes." The interaction got us wondering, how could this woman be so unflinchingly devoted to her mother? How could she accept, even relish, the same circumstance that was driving us nuts? Mother Teresa, we called her. She seemed to epitomize total selflessness and limitless generosity, as if the godliest existence you can achieve is to give your life over joyfully to the needs of others. Even better if it's your parent, because somehow we owe our parents everything, and selflessness is its own reward. There was something about this Mother Teresa thing that poked at Margaret and me. Had we missed the memo about sacrifice needing to be joyous? In concept, we believed that generosity is its own reward. Compassion and service had been big themes in our lives. We believed that doing the right thing would put us in God's good graces. Yet in our journey with Dad, the more we gave, the more depleted we became. We did not feel rewarded for our selflessness. We did not even feel selfless. If anything, we sometimes felt selfish for even thinking about how hard this job was and how we just wanted our own life back. But there was no choice in it, noble or otherwise. We took care of Dad because no one else could do it. For us, the caregiving experience was hard and draining. The point was that we could do something and do it well, even if there were no rewards and we didn't feel joyous while doing it.
The openness and honesty you shared with one another as a couple throughout the experience has also been remarkable to me. And it seems like in a already strong marriage, it was another weaving of strength around and between the two of you. So thank you, Margaret, for allowing yourself to be talked about so freely in this book, and for all your care and creativity as well. I could keep asking questions, but we want to give you all a chance if there are questions that you brought. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this is going to work. Tony has a little something to explain, and we'll have maybe like 10 minutes for questions. So you see there's a rig here in the middle of the center aisle, and it is bracing up a microphone. And so the way to ask a question is to come right up to that microphone and speak right into it. This has all been set up so that the people who will listen to this and watch this later will clearly hear your question. I want to make clear that as you come to the microphone and stand there to ask your question, you will also be on camera. So please do not come forward if you don't want to be seen on this video. You can come up, and because there are a number of you, we ask that you would be concise. Ask your question, and there will be time for conversation and mutual telling of stories later. So if you could just focus on your question at this point, that would be great. Tony does want to give a prize, and so I'm going to let him explain why he has this Dodger bobblehead up here this evening.
I have a lot of Dodger bobbleheads because they find their way into my house, and so I never miss an opportunity to get rid of one. This is Margaret's all-time favorite player, Andre Ethier, and it's going to go to whoever asked the best question. And there is a home run question that I have in mind that maybe one of you will figure it out. But if those of you who know me and you could maybe put yourself in my shoes and imagine me sitting in the audience, what is the question that I would ask myself?
So feel free, any questions, to come forward, and you don't have to wait till the person before you has left and sat down. Like, there can be a line of a couple of people behind one another here in the aisle. And while you're getting brave enough, I'll ask a question, and maybe while Tony's reflecting on this, one of you will come forward. I wonder if you feel that the experience and the process of writing this book and putting it out into the world has changed you in any way.
Yeah, a lot. The stuff that I wrote, it has a way of sticking. I think Margaret will agree. These little moments when you're doing something and you're feeling confusion, and then I'll remember something that I said in my book, and I go, oh yeah, that's the way I feel about this. It's just feedback. And I won't go into lots of examples because of what I learned, because that's in the book. And I think it would take a lot of time, and I would probably babble.
Cynthia, go ahead.
Well, I know how hard it is to sometimes get people up to a mic, so I thought I would start. I have two questions, if that's okay. One is the writing of this must have been extremely cathartic. And did you feel once you had finished it that some of that pent-up pain, perhaps, in the process of doing this and finishing it and finalizing it, has given you some relief about the whole experience?
I would say no. The way it all ended with Dad, if you make it to the end of the book, it was really wonderful. It was
the 11th day.
It all just ended wonderfully.
Okay.
For me, and it continues to feel wonderful.
Good.
It was a lot of fun writing the book. Yeah.
Thank you. The second question is, did you have something, I mean, I don't know if you wrote every day or how you progressed forward, but did you have anything, I don't know, I guess the best example might be like a binky, or did you have something with you when you wrote that you absolutely, whether it was a glass of whiskey or it was a blanket or something that helped to motivate you to get you up and writing?
Well, I had my collaborator, Ilana. She was always there on the other end, and I knew she was going to receive everything that I wrote and react to it. And that's the best
And you
situation.
Just got up and you wrote every day? You just didn't need there wasn't anything that really motivated you into the writing each day, the things that tend to make us procrastinate? Was there something that you just felt
the urge to write? Having that partner there who was expecting something from me, that did it for me. I mean, that did it for me. She was great. I would send her stuff, and then she'd send back her reaction, and she'd be like, "Oh my God, I'm crying, Tony."
Well, that's better to have something animate.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cindy. And now Marietta.
An easy question. Have you always...
Marietta, get right up to the microphone.
Have
Thanks.
you always enjoyed writing? Have you written a lot of things before this endeavor? And a follow-up question, are you going to do it again? Do you feel like you might want to do that?
I enjoy writing, yes. And I'm not going to do it again. I wrote it because I had something to say, not because I want to be an author. And God forbid anything like this happens to me again.
Tony has a lot of creative outlets. Paints a lot. Made a movie after retiring, which is like, are we going to have a screening, or did you just put that in the archive somewhere?
It's on YouTube if you have an hour and 20 minutes.
Okay. He creates things in his garage, and here we go. We've got another question.
Hi. 2 questions, actually. First of all, when's the movie coming out? Second, who do you have lined up to play yourself?
Oh, I love that. Oh, God.
That's almost bobblehead worthy, isn't it?
I love that. Yeah. Well, I know who's going to make the movie, but I haven't sent the book to her yet. It's April's friend Pachi.
That's right.
That's
right.
I got to send her the book.
There you go. Yes,
Yeah,
we do.
We put on a wedding for her, so she owes me. I want Jason Sudeikis to play me, for sure. Not sure who would play my dad.
Well,
and I like Will Forte. He'd be awesome as well. Playing me.
Is Margaret playing herself, or are you going to cast somebody in that role too? All right, great question. Debbie, thank you.
Tony, you mentioned that 4 of your children were involved in the care of your dad as well. What were their ages at the time that they were involved?
They were all in their 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, and as April alluded to, they were at a stage in their lives where they were just out of school, figuring out what their careers were going to be, but not fully employed, and so the timing of that worked out perfectly. I paid them $20 an hour for the time they spent with Dad, and after the second year, that's when we realized we had to put a schedule on it. We had to know who was coming when, so they filled time slots, and of course, as you can imagine, he absolutely loved being with them. It had this effect of making him seem like he was 10 years younger when he was with them.
What kind of a time commitment did they give to him?
What would you say? Each of them, roughly 1 day per week, 4 hour shift.
And they specialized in different things. Well, one of them did a lot of the bookkeeping and accounting and taking them to the bank, and one.
Yeah, Michael became the chief financial officer, where he came in. Dad did everything, and Michael knew nothing. But by the end, Michael did everything, and Dad couldn't do anything.
And Philip took him around
Philip was
and
the
did
handyman,
projects
and Philip was the
together.
handyman.
Yeah.
They'd cut firewood or replace the weather stripping, things like that.
And as best I could tell, Mary and your dad would just call each other and say terrible things and laugh their heads off. All right. Thank you. And we're ready for the next.
I also had the privilege of caring for my father. And but sitting in the audience, I'm thinking about preparing myself to be in Vince's or my father's situation. And would you recommend regular pedicures for us in preparation?
Yes, I would. And I'm right there with you. Like, I haven't done that yet, but I have a feeling I would really like it.
Any other advice that you would have? Because it's, one thing is going through your situation and my situation. The next one is trying to make it easier for the next generation. How should we prepare ourselves to be better cared for?
Well, my strength has always been denial.
Yeah.
Don't know. Denial.
I have to follow this one because...
Okay, Marilyn, right up to the microphone.
Okay. Am I there now?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to follow this one up because my mother cared for her mother. She lived with us. And I remember probably about age 11 saying, when you guys get old, I'll take Dad somebody else can have Mom. What do your kids say about what's coming?
I can tell you what my kid says. You've got a plan, right, Mom? Because you're not living with me.
We don't talk about it. I'm not trying to be funny, but we don't talk about that. There's a lot of things we talk about and other things we don't talk about. Yeah.
Well,
But my son and daughter-in-law live next door to us.
we can see the writing on the wall. Okay, we're going to have our last question. Please come up and ask your question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I was told I might be able to ask Margaret a question, or maybe Tony there.
Yeah.
I actually had two.
So
But-
you can ask Margaret a question, but Margaret, you'll have to speak into the microphone so that, yeah.
As Tony brings out in the book, and as we all know, Margaret, you're an amazing, giving person. Have trouble saying no, although it sounds like you said no very seldom during this whole experience. But did you prioritize, or how did you prioritize all the many different strings that were probably tugging and pulling you from many different directions, not just with Team Vince?
Margaret has more hours in her day than anyone else on the planet.
No, I don't. How did I prioritize? I don't know. I think I was like the plate juggler. And when one plate was about ready to fall, that was the one that you needed to attend to. Like most things, like even raising your kids, you look back and you go, I don't know how I did that. I have no idea. You do what's called, what you're called to do when you're called to do it, I guess.
Wonderful. This gives us a chance to applaud Margaret as well as Tony. Okay, I know Wade heard me say that was the last question, but he wants to win the bobblehead, so let's give him a try.
Tony, what question, if you were in the audience, would you ask yourself?
Yeah.
Please,
Is this the end of it?
Please frame the question, but don't answer it.
I'll tell you. All right, I will tell you what that is. But Matt, you're going to win the bobblehead. I like your movie question a lot. The question I ask myself is, what would Dad's reaction be to this book?
So Wade said you didn't have to answer it, but I'm going to give you a chance to answer it if you want to.
Well, Margaret seems to, you said you had an answer for that. My answer kind of is, I'm not sure. He'd be disappointed in certain parts. I think he would be disappointed. We're assuming that he's reading the book and he's well.
He's cogent, okay.
He'd be disappointed that he was such a burden to us. But true to Dad, he would be cheering me on for doing it. And he would be happy for the attention that he's receiving. Right?
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Please divert on your way out to the cookies in the Aldersgate room. We'll open up the doors, and you can go in there and have a treat, visit a little bit. Tony's going to march out first with me so that we can get him to the book signing table so that you all will know where to find him, and you can get your book signed if you would like to. Fantastic. You might not be able to get free of that, right? So easy. All right. Thanks, everybody.